Welcome to the Workology podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of Workology.
Hi, and welcome to the Workology podcast. Today we're talking about social recruiting. Yay! Social recruiting. I am seeing recent data that the average Facebook user in the United States is spending 21 minutes on this number one and most important social network. It's a great opportunity for candidates to be engaged by recruiters and vice versa. I am here with a new author or I guess a returning author, Andy Headworth. He's the managing director of Serona Consulting. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jessica. Great to be here and talk about this subject that we've been talking along for many years about.
But before we were going live here with the recording, we were talking about how I first met Andy almost 7 years ago, actually in London for an event called True, or the Recruiting Conference, or Recruiting Unconference. And we were first talking about social recruiting, and there is still a lot to be discussed, and I guess we were way ahead of the curve, and in that people are still just dipping their toes in the social media waters. What do you think about that?
I completely agree, and I think what's interesting is that there are, for all of the content and the conversation that's across all our industry medias, there's still been a reticence to dive straight in, and I think we've seen changes in the sector, and I think we've seen the last 18 months, 2 years, some of the stats that have come out by some of the big consulting firms who have done the analysis, and finally CEOs are now realizing, because of the talent shortages, etc., that there is a place where candidates are talking and are residing, i.e. the social world, that they could possibly tap into. It's as if a magic box has been opened again. It's strange, very strange.
But a great opportunity for companies to be able to engage their talent or potential talent pools using more relationship-based channels versus your traditional job board where we send out a post and engage candidates that way.
Oh, completely. And I think that's the thing that has changed. We've seen the last couple of years. We've gone past just the posting jobs on social media channels, which we had a phase of that through, and some companies still try and do that. I think we're now into it's a channel where you can communicate and engage with talent, both internal, which people seem to forget sometimes, and external talent that could potentially be, candidates of the future. And where else could you do that? There aren't many places allows you to do that.
No, and they're sharing intimate information about their careers and their interests, and we can really customize our engagement strategies uniquely to a specific type of candidate.
Completely. Personalization, which we're seeing now to degrees we've never seen before because of the data. I also think we've got the whole changes of behavioral changes we've seen over the last sort of 2 years with all the technology changes. We've all got mobile phones and tablets, so that means we've got cameras, we've got video. But I think the biggest change is the people that have are starting to get a better understanding, and it's of what the data's out there, how they can use it, and how they can make things go faster for themselves. So how many apps are on your phone that make you do things better or more organized or more efficient? And I think they're learning to do that. And I think that companies in the recruiting space are having to embrace social just to keep up with them sometimes. It becomes a bit of a challenge.
Well, let's tell the audience a little bit more about you and what you do. I mentioned your company, but there's a lot more to just your organization and what you offer.
Absolutely. Well, my background is fundamentally recruitment, so I've been in the business a long time, and that's my real passion. It's just basically making sure that recruitment can be done as effectively and as efficient as possible. So the last 8 or 9 years, I've been working with recruitment agencies or third-party recruiters and the corporates to help them, in very simple terms, make their recruitment better, whether it's strategy, process, people, branding. The last 6 or 7 years has been heavily involved around social. You mentioned earlier on that we're both early adopters. We were right at the front of the curve before I think the curve even existed. Um, so because we've been doing it, talking about it, and sharing our experiences, it's sort of snowballed. And work with companies large and small, UK, Europe, and worldwide, helping people, understand how social is a little different channel. Sorry, different process involved in recruitment, and then helping them get their employees to help them recruit better and communicate and engage. Because this isn't just about the HR team. It's not just about the recruiter. It's a company-wide thing, as I'm sure you've found out, with many of your clients. It's a wider strategy than just 2 or 3 people involved in the recruiting team.
You have written a book called Social Media Recruitment: How to Successfully Integrate Social Media into a Recruitment Strategy. And it comes out here in the U.S. Actually, we're recording this on the 27th, and it comes out tomorrow, May 28th. It is the only I think it is one of the only social recruiting books out there. Out of the ones I've seen and read and been a part of, it is the most complete. Why do you think there hasn't yet been a book on social recruiting out there? Is it just hard to write a book, or maybe there hasn't been a need? I mean, I don't know. I mean, my blogs, anytime I write about social recruiting, it do very well.
I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. I'm pleased there haven't been one, obviously, from my point of view. But no, I genuinely don't know. There's lots. If you look at every other aspect of recruiting and HR, there are hundreds of books, even down to the minute details. So I'm surprised there hasn't been. I think we've seen bits and pieces. People tend to talk about social. They haven't specified it into the different areas. So I'm pleased they haven't, obviously, from my perspective. But I can't answer that question. I don't have that magic answer, Jessica.
What's your favorite part of the book that you maybe enjoyed writing most, and also maybe that readers have been most interested in?
As always, it's the case studies. Yeah, it's the one thing that people want to read about with social recruiting, because there aren't as many. A lot of companies keep them to themselves and don't share them. And from my point of view, getting the opportunity to talk to many companies around the world of how they've succeeded and sometimes failed to deliver, social recruiting strategies, and then to share their stories. That's been my favourite part. And then I was in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and I had the pleasure of, taking a copy of the book over to the head of, effectively the HR director of one of the people in the case studies, to meet her and have a chat face to face, which was a nice way to close the circle. So sharing these case studies and examples hopefully gives people and shows people ways of how their company can, also do social in different ways. There isn't one magic formula, and we all have to do things a little bit different to suit our companies.
You wrote a recent article on your blog at Serona Consulting that's titled "Your Target Talent is No Longer All on LinkedIn." Let's talk a little bit about that, because LinkedIn is the number one place that recruiters go first to source and engage and find talent. So why is that? No, not everybody's on LinkedIn. Where are they?
They are. Well, it's very true. I mean, I don't know the stats in the States, but I can certainly that the stats in the UK here are, for example, we have 64 million, whatever it is, population, 64 billion population. LinkedIn say they have half the professional population. 85% of the professional population in the UK on LinkedIn, about 15.5 million, and yet we've got 32 million people on Facebook. So people make the assumption that everybody's on LinkedIn. So there's two parts to this. One, not everybody's on there. Certainly, white collar is one space. I don't know if that's what you call them in America, but that's one area where the majority of people do tend to go there. The blue collar space, certainly lacking over here in terms of people having professional profiles, because they don't see a need to. They don't see it in that space. So where are they? And when we've done the work, we know that they're on places where they can converse with their friends, their colleagues, their work colleagues, and that's on the likes of Facebook. It's on Twitter. It's on Google Plus. It's on GitHub, it's on Stack Overflow, it's on some of the more specialist communities. And the reason why I wrote that post was it was frustrating me that the default place that companies and HR directors and recruitment directors were sending their recruiters was LinkedIn instead of exploring many of the other social avenues.
I agree. Why would you why would you go where every recruiter or every person is going? I like to be at the only game in town or the place where no one is because I'm easily number one.
Yeah, I'd agree, but I think I completely agree with you. I'm the same. But it's also where if you look at how LinkedIn's changed in the last 2 years, recruiters are all over it like a rash. So, they've mailed, they've messaged people to death. I was speaking to some candidates yesterday. In the last week alone, they'd had 100 in-mails from different recruiters in the digital space. Now, A, how can you stand out as a recruiter? And B, it's having the effect of driving these specialist talent, and they're driving them to the specialist networks. As I said, GitHub, Stack Overflow, Behance, Dribble, all the technical ones, they're moving away so they can talk with their peers in a place they're not going to feel threatened with recruiters hassling all the time. It just makes sense, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that that's something that we've seen in the job board industry, that the niche job boards, for me anyway, seem to perform better than some of the larger mass job boards because it offers like this specialization where we can really target who we're engaging and reaching.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge. I think just to take that a stage further, I think you mentioned earlier personalization. I think this is a challenge for a lot of recruiters as well. Is to learn personalization and to get away from this blanket messaging and mass emailing and mass in-mailing and mass emailing of candidates, and focusing on more of an individual approach, which I know for some is time consuming, but it's going to be more effective than reaching out to 100 people at any one time.
What are some of your favorite social media tools for recruiting or an engagement?
Well, I think for me, first thing is I'm a big advocate of sharing content, as I know you are as well. So my number one favorite tool is Feedly. So I use that as the aggregator of content. I've got hundreds and hundreds of feeds and news and blogs that come into Feedly. So that's my content library. I then use Buffer to schedule and share content across my social channels, different content to different networks at different times. Saves me an awful lot of time. Hootsuite is my management tool, which I use to manage my social media channels. From a sourcing point of view, I absolutely love Graph Search on Facebook, and there's a good tool which I'm sure you can link to at the end, but it's on the website intel-sw.com, and they've developed a graph search tool which makes graph searching very, very easy. And for those of you who are not entirely sure what I'm talking about when I say graph search, everything that sits within Facebook, everything that's commented on, your friends, your networks, all the things that's in Facebook is included in the graph, and the Facebook graph search searches all of it. Now we know it's the biggest world's network, so for me it's a place that recruiters don't like going because they still think it's too personal. But for me, it's a great place to find candidates, and I'm still a big advocate of Google Plus. So Google Plus for me is a place where there is millions and billions of profiles. Recruiters don't like it, and as you said earlier, Jessica, you go to places where other recruiters aren't, and it's still not a place they like to go to. So there are some of my favorites.
All good ones for sure. I will make sure to link to intel-sw.com on the transcript, but you can also go visit that directly. I have not heard of this one, but I am a fan of Graph Search as well. I think it's a great opportunity to find those hidden gems on Facebook and kind of start your research as you begin to engage them.
Yeah, and it's a tool that it gives you things. So if you compare Graph Search to LinkedIn, you've got the structured data of LinkedIn. You've also got the relatively structured but also unstructured on Facebook. But it gives you different things. People say different things on Facebook, don't they? They talk about the languages, some of the college courses they've done, and it's just a different place. And I think that the more, which applies to social, isn't it? We all talk about different things. It's all user-generated content. which also has its own challenges. But it's good fun.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today's topic is social media and social recruitment, and I'm here with Andy Headworth of Sorona Consulting. You can connect with Andy on Twitter at Andy Headworth, and he is very active. But let's talk a little bit about Twitter here, because we really haven't touched on Twitter. Are you finding Twitter an effective tool for social recruiting? And if yes, how so?
It's a good question. I was having this conversation this morning with another digital recruiter. Yes, I am. Simple answer is yes. I love Twitter. I think it's a fantastic channel. I think as long as recruiters use it in the right way, don't spam jobs through it, but it's a great communication, engagement, and sourcing tool. So there are tools, you can use Twitter itself. There are a whole myriad of tools to help you use Twitter in a different way, like Follow a Wonk to do searching bios, the use of Twitter lists to aggregate people, which is some of my favorite ways of finding candidates. I still think recruiters don't necessarily get it, and this is the conversation I was having this morning with another digital recruiter. They still haven't quite grasped that. But for me, biggest no-brainer about, certainly over here again, I don't know the US so much, but certainly in the UK, we're seeing a lot of people now who use it as a messaging platform, and they use it every day, which from a recruiter's point of view is very, very important. So I would say it's still being learnt by a lot of people, as we were saying earlier before the show. There are still a lot of people coming to Twitter that are new, and some of the things you and I did years ago to set people up and start people off, we're going back to. But it's a channel that's mainstream. It's everywhere. It's on your phone. It's on your pad. It's on your desktop. Why wouldn't recruiters use it when it's right in the palms of their candidates?
And it's immediate. For me, one of the reasons I love Twitter is that people don't check their emails, right, or necessarily read them, but they will look at tweets. And sometimes it's the best way to follow up with a candidate or reach out to them first to get to know them, and then say, hey, I sent you an email. Can we catch up?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the thing about this comes about, there's a number of platforms like this, and I think obviously text messaging and WhatsApp is very similar for this, is that when you've got your phone or your cell phone, the message comes up on the lock screen for the majority of people, and you have to do something with it to get rid of it. So they're always going to see that message, aren't they? Which I think is, people forget that. They forget the power of the mobile and what's in your palm, and the simplicity of it at the same time.
Let's talk a little bit about employer branding. And we've talked about employer branding a few times on the podcast. We've had Shannon Smeedstadt, another friend of mine has been to talk on about employment branding. I think it's really important when it comes to social media, because we can engage our candidates, potential and current, in the now. Can you talk a little bit more about employment brand and maybe how social recruiting interfaces with that?
Absolutely. I agree with you completely, first of all, that employer branding and social media go hand in hand. I think the first thing is that, for me, what social does within EB is to allow that insight into companies in a much more unstructured way, which makes it more relaxing for the candidates potentially. So, and what I mean by that is, social allows us to share content, talk about things, show interactions, whether it be videos, whether it be pictures, presentations, whatever, and get access to that content quite quickly and access to the employees. Not something that would have happened a few years ago. The honesty and the transparency we're now seeing in a lot of organizations through their employer branding strategies through social media is giving access to candidates they've never had, and that's what excites me. So then when you have companies that do this well, and they can mix up content, they give external access to their employees to share their experiences, really helps the recruiting process. And so from a candidate perspective, before they even go near a company to understand whether they want to work there or apply for a job, they're getting a good feel for what it's like to work there. How do they get to work? Well, what are the people who work there? What are the things they talk about and the content they share? Which from our point of view in recruitment is a fantastic tool to both attract and engage candidates before they've even entered the recruitment process.
To give you some context on employment branding, and Andy and I, we blog a lot, we write a lot, and we're active on the social space, where and I'm going to assume that Andy's the same way, he's also getting entertained and pitched by PR teams for vendors. But also recently, I am getting a lot of emails from marketing and PR teams who are promoting company recruiting teams. For example, just in my inbox this morning is from Nationwide Jobs, and their PR person is pitching me about the fact that they were recently voted as one of the 25 best companies to work for in 2014 by the Sunday Times, and are interested in writing a guest post on our site. So this sort of circles around, like employment brand, social recruiting, all these things work together.
Completely. And I'm yes, like you, my inbox every day gets them. Some more interesting than others, and some actually get my attention. But again, but the funny thing is, we just talked about personalization. Do you know the one thing these PR companies don't do? They don't personalize it. So how many do you get? Dear madam, dear sir, or just hi or hello without any name or any reference to anything that we've done? It's still quite amazing, really.
Sometimes it really ticks me off a little bit, and with the ones that continue responding and following up with me when they haven't taken the time to personalize their message are the ones that I get most fired up about. I have an assistant who reads my emails simply because of the sheer amount of PR pitches that we get.
I wish I had one of those, but I don't have that, Jessica, unfortunately. But they many times they go into my secondary folder. I just do them when I've got time. They're not. A few get through, and we have those conversations, but they're the same as you. That people are learning the power of social and learning the power of social through PR.
Let's talk a little bit about return on investment, because one of my sticking points when it comes to social recruiting is that we often focus on like the number of followers, the number of fans, but we aren't necessarily focusing on like source of hire or these other metrics or measurements that really say, hey, this social recruiting thing is worth our time. So when we talk to our senior executives, CEOs, leadership, we could say, here we have 25% of our hires have came from these sources. What are your suggestions for somebody who is wanting to sort of create a base for metrics and establish that return on investment when it comes to social recruiting?
Yeah, it's a great question, because you and I and everybody else gets it every single day. I think the first thing is, what I say to people is, just please understand what your objectives are for doing it. What do you want to achieve? And that surprisingly, it gets unanswered by too many people. So sometimes, depending on who you're working with in the company, I find actually they just want numbers to start with. If they're starting from scratch, and a CEO will just I've got a situation where I've got two CEOs, they're both friends with each other, and all they're worried about is how many followers they've got on LinkedIn. So their return on the investment in some of the projects is just to win that battle. But on a much more wider picture, so objectives first, then we can do something to measure them against. Whether it's reach, influence, numbers. But from your and I's point of view, let's get down to a bit more detail. It's we want to make placements through social. We want to prove that social's working. Now the problem comes is it's easy if you had an advert with a link that's trackable, or the link has come from an ATS or a recruitment system that's again trackable when it comes back into the application process. That's relatively easy. If that link or if that person came via LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or wherever, we can track that source of hire back in. The problem comes with social, I don't think there's an answer yet, is where, let's just say someone sees a tweet, sees something on LinkedIn, let's just say January, and is not quite ready to move, but they see that. They might engage with you a couple of times, they might follow you, they might connect with you on LinkedIn, but they don't come round to you to apply for a job until, say, June or July when they're next looking. But they go via your career site and place they apply via a job on a career site, yet they knew you from January, and that was the bit that got them hooked into wanting to work for you. That's the bit I think that is still unanswered. I don't know if you've got any magic answers there, Jessica, but we're still trying to do the long-term tracking. Short-term tracking, I think, is easy, and we can establish that. And certainly with social advertising on all the social channels now, that's pretty accurate in terms of source of hire.
You're describing what I consider the fundamental challenge for social recruiting, is that the expectation for the data or the numbers or the ROI behind it is so great because it's new. You think about newspapers and how we've used those for job advertisements and announcements. There was no tracking link that directed it back, but now we're faced with hundreds or potentially thousands of channels that are engaging candidates on and driving them to a single unified place, which would be their career site or your job posting. It's hard to manage and really the expectation of people who want to say, hey, we want to know exactly where everyone came from. Even traditional marketing for consumers is challenged by this very same thing.
I agree, and I think some of the recruiting platforms and distribution platforms we now have on the market are doing a much better job at that than they did 2 years ago. So I think it's got better, but there's still a long way to go in that space.
Well, where can people go to connect with you and then also buy your book? Because they need to pick it up and get reading and get started on social recruiting.
They do. Well, I'm obviously on all the social channels. The fact my name is fairly unique makes it easy to find me. So Andy Headworth, HEADWORTH, will find me on all the channels, and you can just put it into Google. Obviously active on all of them, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. To buy my book, I don't have the Amazon link. Maybe you can put the American Amazon one on the show notes. But if you just go to Amazon and just put social media recruitment, it's a nice bright blue book. You can't miss it. If I say so myself, it's a good read. Go buy.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to everything. I would recommend that you check out Andy's blog as well. We'll have a link there to it. Lots of great information. He's super active on social media and will be extremely responsive. So send him a tweet, send him an email, connect with him on Google+. Lots of different places to connect and learn more about what Andy does.
Absolutely. And thank you for remembering the blog. I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, it has such good information. Don't forget about the blog at all. I want to thank you, Andy, for joining us and talking with us today on the Workology podcast. I so appreciate it.
No, it's been great fun. Thanks very much, Jessica, for asking.
Absolutely. And thanks to you for tuning into the Workology podcast hosted by me, Jessica Miller-Merrill, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all our previous episodes. Have a great day.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by Total Picture Media.